How do we as a society grapple with the men and women who commit unimaginable horror? The United States is one of 53 nations that has capital punishment. There has been a debate for years, as you know, about if it's even effective. But in Boston, the issue has become deeply personal as it works its way through the Supreme Court. Trevor Ault brings us this in-depth look.
No matter how many years pass,
the Boston Marathon continues.
Some wrongs can never be made right. The city of Boston will forever carry the often invisible scar tissue of that horrific day.
3 people died in those blasts, more than 260 injured.
Survivors like LYNN, JULIAN, CRISCI have spent years coming to terms with a suffering that's both communal and intensely personal. The question she still grapples with, even today, should one more person lose their life?
It's been several years now, and this is still under discussion in the Supreme Court.
Don't get me started about that. We had 2 years before his court date, 2 years of limbo, and the trial went on for months and months. And when we finally got what we thought was going to be closure, he was given the death sentence.
What sets the death penalty apart from any other sentence is its finality, which means the appeals process is extensive, in some cases taking 40 years. Convicted marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was sentenced to death in federal court back in 2015. But that decision is still under dispute, thrown out in 2020 by a lower U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, now under consideration from the Supreme Court, and reigniting the existential discussion over the death penalty and the justice system at large. Is its purpose crime deterrence and rehabilitation? Is it retribution? Is it vengeance? The answer depends on who you ask.
I can remember, learning that. I'm sorry, because it's still emotional. For me, it never goes away.
Liz Norden had 2 of her sons injured in the marathon bombings, both of them losing legs. And she now suffers from severe anxiety.
You are, as you've said, forever changed. Do you want restitution for that?
I watch my sons put a leg on every day, and the simple things for us might be challenges for them. Again, I can only stress they're really doing well. But my son JP said to me one day, there's not a day that goes by that he doesn't walk without pain on his prosthetic. So I'm not looking for restitution. I want the ultimate justice, and justice for me would be the death penalty.
In Massachusetts, Liz is in the minority. Only 20% of residents want Tsarnaev put to death. But nationally, she's in the majority, with about 60% in favor of executing people convicted of murder. Liz tells us she hopes Tsarnaev's death would deter others from committing crimes, though there's no proof the death penalty is any more of a deterrent than a life sentence.
If the death penalty were to be thrown out in this case, and he were to simply spend the rest of his life locked up in prison, how would you feel about that?
Sad.
Would you feel like justice had not been served?
I would.
The United States is one of 53 countries where capital punishment is legal. While there's currently a moratorium on federal executions, right now there are about 2,500 inmates on death row in the 27 states where it's allowed. Capital punishment remains largely controversial. 23 states have done away with it altogether, finding issue in its many imperfections. Like Tsarnaev, there are many inmates on death row who, without a doubt, have committed heinous crimes. But far too often, the system gets it wrong. Like the case of George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old wrongfully convicted and executed for the murder of 2 young white girls. In fact, since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, 185 people sentenced to death have been exonerated.
That means there has been 1 exoneration for every 8.3 people who've been executed.
Robert Dunham is the executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center. He spent his professional life as a capital litigator, even arguing before the Supreme Court.
If you're going to have a death penalty, you're going to have communities re-victimized. We all know Boston Strong, and there are significant questions about should we subject the entire Boston community to a new trial.
America has long struggled with how to humanely put prisoners to death. Depending on where you live, if you're on death row, there are 5 different ways the state may kill you. Gas chamber, hanging, electrocution. Some states have recently reinstituted firing squads, and the most common, lethal injection. In 1982, the first lethal injection was administered to Charles Brooks Jr. in Huntsville, Texas, a state now responsible for more than a third of the country's 1,300 lethal injections since. The town is checkered with reminders it was built around the prison system, and it was there in 1998 that journalist Michelle Lyons witnessed her first execution.
I felt like I could do it and be okay.
She soon became the spokesperson for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, ultimately witnessing nearly 300 prisoners die.
It was my job to bring the reporters to death row for these media days that we would have. So now I'm seeing these inmates week after week. That makes it more complex to then watch these people die.
And in 2005, Michelle says her pregnancy made it far more difficult to do her job.
You're seeing a woman going in that room and watching her child die in front of her. And one of the inmates was saying how he had told his mother he didn't want her to come. And that she had said, you know, I was here when you came in this world and I will be there when you leave it, you know, and that tears you up to hear. But, you know, at the same time, they're there for a reason.
As disturbing as it may be, witnesses are a legal requirement of the execution process, ensuring they take place in public view. While some states now use a single drug, a traditional lethal injection involves a 3-drug cocktail, an anesthetic, followed by a paralytic agent, and then a killing drug. If it all works correctly, the paralytic will cause the eyelids to close, the neurons in the brain stop firing, and the cardiovascular system shuts down. All of this should happen within 5 to 15 minutes, but if it goes wrong, and sometimes it does, it could take several agonizing hours.
In about 80% of the autopsies, we see evidence of flash pulmonary edema, that is, a buildup of fluid in the lungs. And it's been likened by the courts to a process in which the person is conscious during waterboarding, suffocation, and the 3-drug executions. They then experience chemical fire from the killing drug.
Michelle Lyons no longer works for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, but the memories have haunted her.
There's so many victims. You know, you have the actual victims, but then you also have the inmate and their family. You have chaplains who have to witness each of these. You have officers who have to escort these people in the room and tie them down. I mean, you have all these people that have to live with those decisions.
There are countless families of murder victims who understandably want to see the culprit experience the same fate as their loved ones. But a study done by the University of Minnesota found just 2.5% of victims' family members reported achieving closure as a result of capital punishment. For survivors like Lynn, that process is an everyday struggle because there is a difference between healing and being made whole.
Do you think you will have closure? Is it even possible at this point?
I am hoping that closure still exists for us, but what happened to us is so internalized emotionally and spiritually that we could never be the same people again.
Do you believe Dzhokhar Tsarnaev deserves to live?
Wow. That is a loaded question. I don't know that I have the power, the right, the authority to say one way or the other whether anyone has a right to live, and neither did he. He had no right to do what he did. He had no power or authority to decide who lives or dies. But neither do I.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.